In this video, I want to talk about how we solve a quadratic inequality. So a quadratic inequality is when we have a quadratic expression that is greater than or less than something. Now, in order to solve a quadratic inequality, it needs to be greater than 0 or less than 0, just like solving a quadratic equation, we need it to be greater than or less than 0. So if it isn't already greater than or less than or equal to 0, then we need to move whatever's on the other side, move it over. Now, supposing that it's already equal or greater than or less than 0, then we can solve it first by figuring out where it's equal to 0. So the first step is to say, okay, hold on a second. I don't know where it's greater than 0, but let me figure out where it's equal to 0. So x squared minus 4x minus 5, where is that equal to 0? So we can start by factoring and saying x minus 5 times x plus 1 is equal to 0. So x equals 5, or x equals negative 1. So the 2 points that I'm going to put on my number line are negative 1 and 5. Okay, so this is kind of a side note. Now, I want to ask myself, where is this thing greater than 0? So there's a couple of different ways to do this, and I want to talk about a couple of ways. So one way is, and my favorite way, is that you can visualize this parabola. So this is a parabola, and the a is positive, which means that it's an up-opening parabola, right? So then these places where it's equal to 0 are the places where it crosses the x-axis, right? And below here, it's negative. Above here, it's positive. So these numbers are negative, these numbers are positive, and these numbers are positive. So if you think about kind of shrinking that graph onto this number line, the area in between negative 1 and 5 is the negative area. The area to the left of negative 1 is positive, and the area to the right of 5 is positive. Those are where the positive values are, right? And these are where the negative values are. So if we want to know where it's greater than 0, it's everything over here. So we can put an open circle, and then it's everything over here. Again, an open circle here, and then it's everything over here. So if you wanted to write it as an interval, it would be from negative infinity to negative 1, and then also from 5 to infinity. And that would be where x squared minus 4x minus 5 is greater than 0. Okay. So another way to do this, if you don't want to or can't visualize the graph of the function, another way to do it is you can test a point. So for example, you can test 0. So if you plug in 0, we get 0 squared minus 0 minus 5. We can say, okay, so that is negative 5, which is less than 0. So you can say it's negative here. You can test a point here like 6. So we can say, okay, we've got 36 minus 24 minus 5. So that's like positive 4, I think, or 5. In any case, it's positive, right? So it's positive here. And then you could test a point over here like negative 2. So that would be like 4 plus 8 minus 5 is 7. So that would be positive. And that's another way of determining where it's positive, negative, and positive. So you can determine that either by visualizing the graph or by testing points inside the interval. We know that it's 0 at negative 1 and 5, and we know that those are the only places it equals 0. So it has to cross from positive to positive, or the opposite, from negative to negative at those points. It can't jump from positive to negative without crossing through 0. So we know that these are the points where that happens. And everywhere over here it's either positive or negative. Everywhere in here, it's either positive or negative, and everywhere over here. Again, I think the easiest way is this way to kind of visualize the graph because we know what parabolas look like. And so once you visualize the graph, it's easy to say that this is positive, this is negative, and this is positive. Okay, let's try another one. So let me go ahead and put it like a line down. All right, so this one says negative 2x squared minus 5x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 0. So again, the first step is to figure out when is this thing equal to 0. So negative 2x squared minus 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. You might want to, you can factor this. You might want to first go through and divide everything by negative 1. It'll make it easier to factor. So 2x squared plus 5x plus 2 is equal to 0. This is going to have the same roots. It's going to be equal to 0 at the same places. So let's go ahead and factor this. So we know we need to have a 2x and an x, and these are both going to be positive. And then we need to have a 2 and a 1 here. Now we want the 2 to be multiplied by the 2 to get 4. So I'm going to put it here, and then the 1 needs to be multiplied by the 1 to get 4 plus 1 is 5. Okay, so this should work. So x equals negative 2, or x equals negative 1/2, right? If we move over the 1 and then divide by 2. So x equals negative 1/2 or x equals 2. Remember, these are the places where x is actually equal to 0. So negative 2 and then negative 1/2. Okay, so now let's go back to what it's actually asking us. So these were the places where it's equal to 0. The question is asking us for the places where this parabola is greater than or equal to 0. So this is a downward facing parabola, right? So it's kind of going like this. So it's going to be negative over here, positive over here, and negative over here. So then we are including the endpoints. So the positive, it says greater than or equal to 0, so that's where it's positive, and we are including our endpoints. So if we wanted to write it as an interval, we would write from negative 2 to negative 1/2, with brackets on both because we are including those endpoints. And that's how we solve a quadratic inequality.